Hello folks, today we're going to be replacing the air cooler in my computer with a liquid cooler. This is not so much a installation video as it is proof that any old fool, including myself, can in fact install an all-in-one liquid cooler and get pretty decent results. We are using the Arctic Freezer 3 Pro 240, meaning it has a 240 millimeter footprint. And we've got 3 Noctua Redux 1700 fans. So I'm hoping for pretty good results and a pretty quiet performance. So let's get started. I am going to start by removing the old stuff, so I need to get the fans out. The fans that were in there were getting pretty noisy, and so that's why I'm doing this. As you can see, there's a little bit of dust in there. I do run a positive pressure case setup when I can to try to keep dust at a minimum, but it's been a while since I've cracked this one open and cleaned it, so I apologize for the mess. These are 2 connection fans. They have ARGB and they're 12 volt PWM fans, so there are 2 connectors for each fan. To get them out, you just basically take the screws out from the outside of the case and that'll free them up. I have the headers connected for the power to the motherboard so it can run the speed, and then the RGB is also connected to the motherboard. But I guess what I meant to mention is that the power headers, I have them running to a fan controller hub just because it was easier at the time I put this machine together, but going forward I will have 2 of them wired in a Y plug, but every fan will be individually controlled. The Arctic Freezer has 2 different installation options. You can have the pump, the fan, and the VRM fan, which is a unique feature, controlled by either a single wire or separately. I am going to be connecting them together, so the pump, CPU fan, and the VRM fan will all run at the same speed. I will be using the QFan utility in my BIOS to control that. This is a Linux box, so I don't have quite as much flexibility with the software, but that's fine. It works. It's always worked just fine. So we're going to get the old stuff out. This is the mounting rails for the CPU heatsink. So we've got the fans out. Now we've got the CPU cooler out. So pretty straightforward there. And so yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm trying a new overhead setup for shooting, and I'd say results are mixed. I need to learn to keep things in the shot a little bit better, so I apologize for that, but at least you get an idea of what's happening. So now I've got the power the RGB unhooked. I need to get it to the back side to get to the speed controller, but that'll happen here in a second. And unfortunately, because they're routed through the case, I can't just unplug them. So that's why I got to set them inside and take the back off. But getting most of your old stuff out of the way is really pretty straightforward. Everything these days is pretty easily clipped and unclipped, so don't be too worried about it. But there we go. They're unhooked and getting them out of there. So out with the old, and we'll start putting in the new stuff. I do kind of have a case of the fumble fingers. Here's an example of a bad idea I had. The backing plate is loose now because there's nothing holding it on. So I thought, well, maybe some electrical tape. And this proves that I don't edit out my mistakes or going to doctor this up to make myself look like a genius, because this idea did not work. The backing plate, pretty much the tape would not stick to the motherboard, so it fell down. So I did have to support it from behind, but maybe in your case it might work a little bit better. But like I say, I'm just showing you the truth that I am, although an experienced technician, certainly not a genius when it comes to any of this stuff. And so this is me cleaning the old thermal paste off of the CPU. I'm just using a Q-tip with some alcohol, isopropyl rubbing alcohol, and it comes right off. It's not too big of a mess. So a couple Q-tips and then I'll wipe it down here in a second. But when you're doing this, if you are following along for whatever reason, you definitely want to make sure to get as much of that old paste off as possible. Paste does have a life to it, and eventually it starts to harden. Newer pastes are a lot more resilient, but unless you buy some of the real exotic stuff, you're going to find that over time it does harden and doesn't perform quite as well. And although I don't think that was the root of my problem, in fact, this CPU was not installed all that long ago. It's a AMD Ryzen 7. It's a 5800 XT, and it was using the stock cooler that was included, but this paste is less than a couple months old, but I noticed it was running pretty warm. The XT series is basically overclocked from the factory to get a couple extra 100 megahertz. Nothing amazing, but they are pushing it pretty hard. And here's my case of the fumble fingers, trying to get those rails installed. But those are the hold downs for the new pump and cold plate assembly. They attach to the existing backing plate, but there's some little plastic washers that go over the standoffs, and then the mounting brackets go over the top of that. Or I'm sorry, the screws go on through the brackets to hold it to the motherboard. So after a lot of fumbling, I finally managed to get those kind of in and right. There is a left and right. They are marked L and R, so very, very simple to follow, I'd say. Overall, this kit was relatively straightforward. And now the part that's going to make you all cringe. I'm putting on the thermal paste here, and I am intentionally showing this as bad as it went, simply because I know a lot of people get pretty triggered and are very concerned with how paste is applied. I've built countless machines, and I can tell you, honestly, you don't have to be that worried about it. So even though I was actually having trouble getting the paste to stick to the heat spreader, it seemed like it just was dragging along from the tip and not going onto the CPU. There's a little magic, but please don't be amazed or afraid. This is left in here to prove to you that no matter how bad you are or you think you might be, the functionality is really what counts. And I've seen several tests over the years that show that paste applications kind of not completely irrelevant, but a whole lot less touchy than people think. And because I'm not a competition overclocker, I'm not going to worry about a degree or two. So this is me just being honest again, that, you know, if I can do it, you can do it. But I've put my share on there in the past, and I have yet to have one go completely crazy on me. So don't be, like I said, don't be flustered, or you don't have to yell at me in the comments. I'm pretty much aware this is less than ideal, but like I said, I'm trying to demonstrate that, again, you know, you don't have to get too crazy worried about it. So I wish it would have gone better, but it didn't. But I'm just going to leave it the way it is, and I already, having tested it, know that it works just fine. So in any case, that's the thermal paste. They said to put it in an X. They use MX6, which is a pretty decent paste. It seemed like it was a good viscosity, not just pure water and not super glue. But next step is you put the cold plate on and line that up with the two screws and the retention brackets that you already installed. So when I get my wiggly fingers to finally get her started here, one tip I would give you when you're installing a cold plate or a CPU cooler, do them evenly. You want the pressure to be as even as possible. So you'll notice I do a couple turns and then I switch to the other screw. Go back and forth. That is best practice for installing pretty much any cooling solution, is to keep the pressure on it as even as possible. That helps the paste spread more evenly and helps the performance a little bit. So despite the fact that I just told you that the paste doesn't matter, it helps give it the best shot you can if you use the installation pressure to spread it as evenly as you can. You want it to fill in the voids. The purpose of thermal paste is not to conduct heat. It's to fill the gaps between the cold plate and the top of the CPU. So when you're done, you should have a very thin layer, but you want to make sure it's at least been applied to the entire contact area. So again, go evenly, go back and forth, go in an X pattern if it's a 4 screw system. But this one's actually pretty straightforward. It's just 2 going into those retention brackets. But like I said, just take your time, turn or 2, half a turn, whatever you feel comfortable with. And because of those washers and the way this one's set up, it does bottom out. Most of the new cooling solutions have a limit. It used to be in the old day you kind of just felt the spring and went by that, but now it'll tell you when you're far enough. So that's on there and good. There is a small piece of tape that's covering some electrical connections, so as the instructions say, be sure to take that off, and hopefully you obviously remember to take the one off the bottom of the cold plate before you put it on the CPU. That copper is almost always covered. But then this little guy just pops on the top. It is magnetically retained, and it makes an electrical connection. It is the CPU and VRM fans. They have a small side firing fan there that's supposed to keep your voltage regulator modules. That's what the VRMs are. They control the power for the board. It keeps them cool, so we got that snapped in, and then I connected the wire to the CPU fan header, which is what they advised when using the single wire setup. So now it's time to put in the radiator. Because of the clearance with the Arctic, in my case, it did not fit over the ram. Normally I like to mount these on top, but was forced to use the front. It is an exhaust setup, so it's pushing air out from the case through the radiator and then out through the front. I do have the hoses at the lowest point, and the pump is not the highest point. This is a little bit less than perfect, but because I have the cables for the front panel running through the top there, it's as high as I could get it. But we got the top snap back on, and so the cooler is actually installed. Now it's just time for the fans. And those are very straightforward. They did come with all the included hardware. And I've always had good luck with Noctuas. They're nice and quiet and very reliable. These are optimized for pressure. I am, again, going with a positive pressure system. So I've got the fans pointing inwards. So essentially they're sucking cold air from the room around it and then blowing it into the case. I always try to do 2 in and then 1 out. So I've got 2 fans on top blowing in and down, and then the one in the back exhausting, and then the 2 in the front are also exhausting. So this one might run a little bit of negative pressure, but I'll just have to break it open and clean it more often. It's not as important that you just which setup you have as much as you have good airflow and you're not obstructing it. Try to keep your cable management as good as you can. In this video, I'm not getting too worried about cable management, just because I'm trying to show the mechanics more so than how to be a little bit extra obsessive. But do take it into consideration. And do not, you see here, I'm going to try to fit those hoses in front, but nope, it's going to block too much of that fan airflow. So even though it's going to cover up the pretty LCD or whatever video screen on my video card, I don't care. I'd rather have good airflow with as few obstructions as possible. So I'm just going to leave that guy right up where it is. And there we go. So the cooler has been installed. The fans have been installed. This is a before. I ran it and it hit about 81 degrees. This is just basically running a sysbench at 100% CPU load. And then this is afterwards, and it dropped down quite a bit, almost 20 degrees Celsius. Same exact test, same exact machine, same everything. And so we got ourselves about an 18 degree delta, so I'm very happy with that. So in any case, like I said, the purpose of this video is to just kind of walk you through the process, and if I can do it, you can do it. So thanks for watching and enjoy your day.